7 days after we moved into our new house, the former owner called me. I forgot to disconnect one camera. I saw your daughter doing something you need to see. Come alone. The phone almost slipped from my hand. I am Dorothy. I am 68 years old, a widow of 5 years, and a woman who prefers the quiet predictability of a well-kept home. When I sold the property my late husband and I built, I used the cash to buy a sprawling 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. My daughter Sarah had insisted. She and her husband Mark were struggling with rent, and she presented the idea as a perfect solution. They would move in, help take care of the property, and ensure I was never lonely. I agreed mostly because a house this size did feel empty and I wanted to be practical. I paid for the house in full. My name alone sat on the deed. The first week was chaotic, filled with cardboard boxes and the smell of fresh floor polish. Sarah took charge of arranging the living room, dismissing my suggestions with a breezy, "Oh, Mom, let me handle the heavy lifting. You just relax." I let it go. I assumed she was just excited to have a proper living space. Then came the 7th day. I was wiping down the granite kitchen counters when my cell phone vibrated. The caller ID showed Arthur, the kind retired gentleman who had sold me the house. "Arthur, hello. Did we miss a piece of mail?" His voice was strained, lacking the warm timbre I remembered from the closing table. "Dorothy, I need to apologize. I left a security camera active in the dining room ceiling corner. I went to delete my cloud account today and saw the live feed." He paused, taking a ragged breath. "I saw your daughter doing something you need to see. Please, come to my new apartment. Come alone." The rag in my hand went completely still. I didn't ask questions. I simply grabbed my car keys. Arthur's new apartment was 20 minutes across town. He had tea waiting, but neither of us touched it. He opened his laptop on the small dining table, his face lined with genuine distress. "I am not a snooping man, Dorothy. I just wanted to make sure the system was wiped, but the audio triggered and I heard my own name." He pressed play. The screen showed my dining room illuminated by the afternoon sun. Sarah and Mark were sitting at the table, leaning closely over a stack of blueprints. I recognized them. They were the original floor plans Arthur had left in the kitchen drawer. "The basement is huge," Mark muttered, tracing a line on the paper. "If we put up drywall here and here, it's basically an apartment. We can move her down there before the holidays." Sarah nodded, sipping her coffee. "She won't fight it. Mom hates conflict. Once we move her down, we can give the master suite to your parents. They've been wanting to leave the city anyway." "What about the renovation costs?" Mark asked. Sarah chuckled, a sound that made my stomach turn into a block of ice. "I have the joint credit card she gave me for groceries. She literally never checks the statements. We'll just buy the materials on that, say it's for household upgrades. By the time she notices, the basement will be done and she'll be living in it." Arthur paused the video and looked away, giving me a moment of privacy. I didn't cry. Tears are for things you can't control. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity washed over my mind. They thought I was a fragile, oblivious old woman who would simply fade into the background of my own home. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "Could you email this clip to me?" I drove home in total silence. The radio stayed off. My mind worked through a mental inventory of my finances, my security, and my physical space. I had spent my entire life managing household budgets and raising a family. I was not about to be outmaneuvered by 2 people who couldn't afford their own rent. When I walked through the front door, Sarah was in the hallway, measuring the width of the stairs. "Hey, Mom, how was your drive?" she asked brightly, rolling up the tape measure. "Refreshing," I replied, slipping off my coat. "What are you measuring for?" "Just thinking about a runner rug to protect the wood," she lied smoothly. I smiled, nodded, and walked straight to my master suite. I locked the door behind me. My first priority was the money. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The joint credit card I had given Sarah was meant purely for shared groceries and minor household supplies. I clicked on the pending transactions. There it was, a $3,200 charge at a high-end lumber and hardware supply store, and another $800 at a furniture outlet. I didn't call her. I didn't go downstairs and yell. I simply picked up my phone, dialed the bank's fraud, and lost card department and reported the card as misplaced. I instructed them to cancel the card immediately and not to issue a replacement. Then I transferred the entire balance of my checking account into a private savings account that only I could access. I closed my laptop, walked over to my heavy mahogany dresser, and retrieved the spare keys to the house. I slipped them into my purse. The foundation of their plan was my money. I had just removed it. The next morning, while Mark and Sarah were still asleep, I left the house early. I drove to the local hardware store, the very same one where Sarah had racked up a $3,000 pending charge. I wasn't there to shop for building materials. I was there for security. I purchased a heavy-duty commercial-grade deadbolt, a set of smart plugs, and a small, heavy, fireproof safe. When I returned, the house was quiet. Mark was at work, and Sarah was upstairs in her room. I called a local handyman I had trusted for years. He arrived within the hour. By lunchtime, my master bedroom door had a lock that couldn't be picked with a simple paperclip or a credit card. I placed all my essential documents, my passport, the house deed, my banking information, and my jewelry into the fireproof safe and shoved it deep into the back of my walk-in closet. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when Sarah finally came downstairs dressed to run errands. "Mom, did you hear drilling earlier?" she asked, grabbing her purse from the entryway table. "Just a minor repair," I answered, turning a page. "Okay. I'm heading to the grocery store, and then I need to stop by the hardware place to pick up some gardening supplies." She waved the joint credit card at me with a quick smile. "Do you need anything?" "No, thank you, Sarah. Have a safe trip." I watched from the window as she pulled out of the driveway. I knew exactly what was going to happen in about 20 minutes. I walked into the kitchen, put the kettle on the stove, and prepared my favorite chamomile tea. I wanted to be perfectly relaxed when my phone rang. The tea was just cool enough to sip when my cell phone vibrated on the marble counter. It was Sarah. "Mom?" Her voice was tight-pitched high with a mix of panic and embarrassment. "Mom, did you do something to the bank account?" "What do you mean, dear?" "I'm at the checkout. The card was declined. The cashier tried it 3 times, and there's a line of people behind me. I tried to log into the app, but it says the account is empty." "Oh, yes," I said, calmly taking a slow sip of my tea. "I closed that account this morning." "You... what? Why, Mom?" "I look like an idiot right now. How am I supposed to pay for this?" "I imagine you will use your own debit card, Sarah. When I reviewed the statements yesterday, I noticed several $1,000s in pending charges at a hardware store and a furniture outlet. Since the card was exclusively for shared groceries, I realized it had been compromised. So I shut it down to protect my finances." Dead silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she realized her secret remodeling budget had just evaporated. "Mom, those charges were... we were going to surprise you with some house updates," she stammered. "I don't like surprises," I replied. "And I certainly don't like paying for them without being asked. See you when you get home." I hung up the phone and set it face down on the counter. The first boundary was set in stone. When Sarah returned, she was empty-handed and red-faced. She stormed into the kitchen where I was quietly chopping vegetables for my own dinner. "You canceled the card without even talking to me," she hissed. You spent $4,000 without talking to me. I countered, not looking up from my cutting board. The arrangement was free rent in exchange for you helping around the house. Free rent does not include a blank check. Before she could argue further, the front door opened and Mark walked in. He looked stressed. Behind him, a man in a dusty work shirt carried a clipboard. "Babe, the contractor is here to look at the basement dimensions," Mark called out, oblivious to the tension in the room. I put down my knife and wiped my hands on a towel. I walked out to the entryway. The contractor looked at Mark, then at me. "Good afternoon," I said to the man, my tone pleasant but firm. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to take measurements for the basement remodel Mark requested," the contractor said. I looked at Mark, whose face had suddenly gone very pale. "I see," I said. I turned my attention fully back to the contractor. "I am Dorothy, the sole owner of this property. My name is the only one on the deed. I have not authorized any remodeling, and I will not be paying for any work done on this house. If you begin any construction, you will be doing it for free." The contractor stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at Mark, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true?" "You don't own the house," Mark stammered. "We're family. We're just making arrangements." "I don't work on family drama," the contractor grunted. He turned around, walked out the front door, and let it slam behind him. Mark turned to me, his jaw clenched. "What are you doing, Dorothy?" "We were trying to improve the house. My parents are arriving next week, and we need space." "Your parents are welcome to visit," I said, folding my arms. "The guest room down the hall is perfectly comfortable for a short stay." Sarah stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "Mom, be reasonable. Mark's parents are older. They can't be crammed into a guest room. We figured you could take the basement once it's finished, and they could have the master suite. It just makes sense." I stared at my daughter, marveling at the sheer audacity of her statement. "You figured I would give up the master bedroom in the house I bought with my own money to move into a basement so your in-laws could live here permanently." "It's about family taking care of family," Mark interjected loudly, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply held my ground. "This is my home. I sleep in the master suite. Your parents will sleep in the guest room for a maximum of 3 nights. If that doesn't work for them, there is a very nice hotel 2 miles down the highway. My space is not up for negotiation." I turned my back on them and walked into my bedroom. As I shut the door, I engaged the new heavy-duty deadbolt. The loud click echoed in the hallway. It was the sound of absolute ownership. Despite my clear instructions, Mark's parents, Helen and Richard, arrived the following Friday with a rented trailer hooked to the back of their SUV. I watched from the living room window as Mark and Richard began unloading large, heavy cardboard boxes, not suitcases. They were moving in. I walked out to the front porch just as Sarah was directing her mother-in-law up the steps. "Oh, Dorothy, the house is just lovely," Helen cooed, looking around like she had just won a prize. "Sarah told us the master suite has a beautiful soaking tub. My joints are so looking forward to it." I stood squarely in the doorway, blocking their entry. "Hello, Helen. Richard. Welcome. I see you brought a lot of things for a weekend visit." Helen laughed nervously. "Oh, didn't Sarah tell you we're transitioning? We'll be staying a few months while we look for a place. But honestly, we're in no rush." I looked over Helen's shoulder directly at Sarah, who suddenly found her shoes very interesting. "There has been a miscommunication," I said, my voice carrying over the yard. "This house is not a hotel, nor is it a transition home. You are welcome to stay in the guest room until Monday morning. After that, you will need to find other accommodations." Mark dropped a box on the driveway. "Dorothy, you can't just kick them out. They drove 8 hours." I am not kicking them out. I am honoring the 3-day invitation I extended. The boxes stay in the trailer. Only suitcases come inside. I stepped back to let Helen in, leaving Mark and Richard standing in the driveway with a box of kitchenware they would never unpack in my house. The weekend was suffocatingly tense. Helen complained loudly about the cramped guest room. Mark and Sarah whispered furiously in the kitchen. I went about my routine tending to my garden, cooking my own meals and locking my bedroom door every time I stepped away. On Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the kitchen. Mark's parents were sitting at the island eating my cereal. Sarah and Mark were drinking coffee. "It is Monday," I announced. "Checkout time." Helen dropped her spoon. "You're actually throwing us out on the street." "There are 3 hotels in town." "I suggest the Marriott," I replied. Mark stood up, his face red. "If they leave, we leave Dorothy. You'll be all alone in this giant house. Good luck paying for everything without us here to help." It was an empty threat, and we both knew it. They had no savings. They relied entirely on my pantry, my utilities, and the credit card I had canceled. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it on the counter in front of Mark. "I'm glad you brought that up. Since the arrangement of you helping hasn't worked out, I have drafted a standard lease agreement. If you and Sarah wish to stay, rent is $1,800 a month plus half the utilities. First and last month's rent is due by Friday. If you cannot pay, you have 30 days to vacate my property." Sarah gasped. "Mom, you can't charge us rent." "I can and I am. I bought this house to live in peace, not to be managed and manipulated by my own children." Friday. $3,600. Or start packing. They didn't have the money. Without my credit card to float their lifestyle, their financial reality came crashing down. Helen and Richard left that afternoon deeply offended and grumbling about my hostility. Good riddance. Over the next 30 days, Sarah and Mark packed their belongings. The house was quiet, save for the sound of packing tape and suppressed arguments between the two of them. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the highway. Sarah cried the day she handed me back her key, but I didn't offer a lifeline. I accepted the key, wished her well, and closed the door. I had the locks changed the next morning anyway. Houses hold on to the truth longer than people do. I think about that often now in the months since. How close I came to losing everything my husband and I worked our whole lives for, simply because I was expected to be a compliant, quiet mother. I think about how real love doesn't need to be protected through secrecy or stolen credit cards. I still live in that house. I've since put in the tomato garden I always planned, and some mornings I sit on the porch with my coffee watch. The light move across the yard and feel nothing but profound relief. I reclaimed my sanctuary, not with lawyers or screaming matches, but with quiet, absolute boundaries. If you were in my position, I wonder what you would have done differently or the same. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below and to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. We have so many more stories like this one to share with you, so please subscribe so you never miss a moment like this. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Let's keep walking this road. Looking back on everything, the most valuable lesson I took from this experience wasn't about money, real estate, or outsmarting anyone. It was about the quiet power of boundaries. For a long time, I believed that being a good mother meant endless accommodation, even if it meant shrinking myself to fit perfectly into my children's plans. But I realized that allowing yourself to be diminished doesn't help your family grow. It only teaches them to take you for granted. I learned that I don't ever need to apologize for wanting peace, security, and respect in my own home. Standing my ground wasn't an act of anger or cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. It reminded me that it is never too late to draw a line in the sand, and that sometimes a firm and simple no is the only way to protect the life you've worked so hard to build. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us bring you more emotional, dramatic, and unforgettable stories every day. Thank you for listening and stay tuned for the next amazing story.